All right, good afternoon, folks. So today we are basically going to wrap up our Volcano Island game. So there's not a whole lot more to do. We're going to mess around a little bit with some UI stuff. We're going to add a little bit of sound things in. But overall, the game is really close already to being a sort of playable game with a failure state and a way for us to reset stuff. We wrote a few sort of reset functions last whatever, a couple weeks ago, or last time or something. I don't know. Whenever we wrote a few reset functions for our player and our spawner. So we are almost done. It may not sort of look like it exactly by what you see, but so by what you have so far, but it's actually relatively quick to add in some simple UI and to hook up some buttons and some simple scene transitions and stuff like that. So because we are pretty much finished with this, and we'll be finishing it today, I did put the assignment up. So everyone in your group should work off of the same repo, the one that is sort of associated with the project on GitHub Classroom. If you created your own branch or just downloaded the zip file, that's perfectly fine. Make sure that you have one version to work off of. So you can pick somebody in the group and have them just have that be the version that everyone works from, and everybody just pulls that version down, or you can sort of set it up in a different way. Maybe everybody downloads the fresh one, and then you pick someone to just sort of reproduce the stuff we did in class. So whatever you want to do, but you need one version of it so that everyone in your group can work off of that version. Use Git or whatever version control you want for that, and then make sure that by the time it's due, the version you want me to do the grading on is the one that's in the GitHub Classroom repo. If you have problems with Git at all, if you have some conflicts or something and you don't know how to resolve them, you haven't resolved Git conflicts before, I can certainly help with that. Otherwise, it's mostly up to you how you decide to finish it out. So we will look at the assignment at the end of class. I'll just sort of briefly talk about it for a few minutes, and then over the course of the next 2 weeks, which is when it'll be due, so 2 weeks from today, I will potentially give some pointers or some hints on the individual pieces that you have to work on. So we'll talk about that a little bit later at the end. Okay, so I had a slide similar to this last time, sort of a what's left slide. So we messed around with some particle effects. You can still make more particle effects, but I showed you sort of a way that we could create an actual effect and then instantiate it when something happens. So when those fireballs hit the ground or hit the player, we play a certain particle effect. We saw some of the animation stuff. That does take a little bit of practice to get used to, but in essence, it's just a keyframe system. So I can move the pieces of my character around using keyframes, and then Unity will interpolate between those keyframes to make the motion happen. So we sort of have a head bobbing snowman going around. So a couple pieces we need left. Start and sort of a game over screen. So that's the first thing that we'll mess around with. And then we're going to add in some music. I don't have any sound effects to add in, so this is something that I will want you to do for the assignment. But adding in music and sound is the exact same process. So we will mess around with music here a little bit later today. We will have to make a couple more classes. We'll have like a music manager type class. So we will have a couple more classes for this, but for the most part, we're actually really close. I think before we get into the game over screen, I think last time we ended up with here. I'm going to play. We ended up with our sort of head bobby snowman, and when we would go to the left, the head would sort of move behind the body. So now the body's sort of in front. I think last time I mentioned that I wanted to fix this so that we didn't have this sort of potentially sort of weird issue happening whenever we would move in one direction and not in the other direction. So the way to fix this, the way that we sort of originally messed with this was the position of the head and the body. So if I, instead of being in this 2D mode, if I switch to, and I'm going to turn the spotlight on here, if I go over here and click this little 2D button, which is currently sort of highlighted. If I click it off, then I get to my 3D mode. And this is what our character actually looks like in 3D. So the camera's here. And because we're making a 2D game, the camera is technically in orthographic mode. It doesn't see any of this sort of perspective stuff. So if I move things sort of backwards or forwards to or away from the camera, then it sort of doesn't show that sort of perspective shift as if you were sort of looking at it with your eyes or something to have that sort of depth. So by doing it this way, I ensure that the head is in front of the body. But remember how I flipped the snowman to get it to look the other direction? I rotated it in the Y by 180 degrees, which would totally flip this around. Y is the green sort of arrow here. So it would flip it around, so now the head would be closer to the camera and the body would be closer to the camera and the head would be further away. That's not ideal because then that gives us that sort of body in front of the head. So that was sort of a quick fix for it, but we need something that's going to be more permanent for us. So over here in the hierarchy, I'm going to look at the head and I'm going to look at the Z value of the head. So this is why the head is closer to the camera, because I have a Z value on this. So I'm just going to set this Z value back to 0. So now in my sort of 3D view here, the head and the body are in exactly the same location. They're both at 0. And I can confirm that by looking at both the head and the body. The head here, of course, is a little bit different in the X and Y because I moved it around to sort of stack it on top, whereas the body is just left at 0, 0, 0. So now with the Z both the same, there's actually no guarantee that the head is going to be in front of the body. In fact, I still get that situation, even though, actually, hold on, my head is still -1 here for some reason. Okay, so I think that might be from some of the animation stuff. But in any case, there's another way to handle with what sprites are in front of what. That's down here in the the additional settings for the sprite renderer. We don't have to mess with the sorting layer. The order in layer is a value that we can change. So for the head, I'm going to change the order in layer to 1. The body already still has an order of layer of 0. And I'm going to change the order in layer to 1 for the head. So if I run this now, notice that no matter what direction, the head is in front. So the order when it draws these sprites can be controlled by that order in layer. So the head will always be in front of any other sprite that has an order in layer lower than it. So lower than 1, the head is going to be in front. So this is also an easy way without dealing with the Z value. This is also an easy way. And the Z value here, it does actually it is actually shifted by this -1 still. If I go back to my scene, because of the way the animation I have set up being -1 in the Z, it actually just moves it back out front. But it's still, game here. Even though it's flipped like this, the head still gets drawn in front of the body. So yeah, the order in layer. Let me stop here. So the order in layer is the individual components for the head and the body in the sprite renderer. So the thing that actually is rendering the graphics under additional settings, that's where I have order in layer. And you can actually add more sorting layers. So if you have like a background layer that you want to make sure that all the sorting is correct for that, and then you have a foreground layer that is always in front of the background, you can sort of do some relative sorting that way. But for our game here, it's not a big deal to mess with the actual layer itself. Just putting in the order in layer will allow certain things to be drawn always in front of other things. So this is probably the better way to handle what's drawn in front, rather than just using a Z position. But a Z position can be useful if you just need to do sort of a quick sort of order to draw things. So that's something that I'm currently setting here. So the head, order in layer 1, that'll help out for us. So that was something I wanted to mention that I didn't get to last time. Yeah. So Nick, I can mention the sort of flipping the sprite here. So that was in the player script, and that was just the stuff after our animation. So we have a piece here that sets the animation, so essentially is running, whether that's true or false, and then based on what the input is, so whether it's positive or negative, we would basically change the angle in the Y to either 0 for moving to the right or 180 for moving to the left. Because I rotate around the Y-axis by 180, that'll make it look like the whole sprite is flipped the opposite direction. So that's just it's this sort of transform.Euler angles is similar to doing like a transform.position and changing the position. This just changes the angle of the sprite in the X, Y, and Z, so the rotation. So the Y here is 0 or 180, depending on the input. Okay, so when it comes to like text, like UI stuff, text on your screen, it deals with this canvas idea that you create a canvas and then you put whatever UI stuff you want to on the canvas, and the canvas has ways that it can scale. So if you say you have you plan to write something for a phone, write a game for a phone, phones do have different screen sizes, different resolutions. So this canvas idea allows the canvas to resize and can shift around your buttons or your text so that it still looks good. That would be sort of part of the porting process. You want to port from Android to iOS, you got to deal with all the iPhone screen sizes compared to all your Android screen sizes and resolutions and all that kind of stuff. So part of the porting process is making sure your UI is still going to look good, and this canvas idea helps with that. So back here. So what we're going to do for this project is we're going to use just the standard Unity UI system. There are other UI systems that people have made. Unity has incorporated what's known as Text Mesh Pro. It's about the same as the standard Unity UI system, except it has a lot more options. So in terms of functionality and the way you use it, it's very similar. We're just going to use the standard Unity UI for this game, but we'll probably mess around with Text Mesh Pro in the future. So we're going to need to have a main menu, and we probably want some kind of game over screen. Our main menu will be done in a totally separate scene. So we'll make us a new scene a little bit later. For now, we're going to create a new UI image. So in Unity, I'm going to go back to the 2D view here. So in my hierarchy, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go down to UI, and I'm going to do image. So you might notice, like, so here there's text and text mesh pro. If you see the text mesh pro, we'll mess around with those probably later. You don't have to. We're not going to use them for now. But for this one, we just want an image. As soon as I click on this, so again, right click, UI, image. As soon as I do that, we see something that potentially looks a little weird. So our camera is right here. I mean, this is our full game when we actually play it, is in this region. But all of a sudden, we have this gigantic white thing here and a huge box. You don't have to worry about this box looking like it's sort of off-center or something. This is just the canvas. This will get overlaid on the camera when you run the game. So you don't have to worry about how large this is compared to your game, or that it sort of overlaps the game in a little bit. It's just the canvas. And it's something that we play with. And then when we run the game, the canvas will overlay onto our actual camera itself. So Gabe, I right-clicked in the hierarchy. So in the hierarchy, I right-clicked, UI, image. So the first time you do this, it automatically creates the canvas for you. So if I highlight the canvas in the hierarchy, you can see that it sort of highlights all the edges here and puts a little thing here in the center. It also creates this event system. We don't have to mess with this. This is what allows the buttons to work properly that we're going to make. But for the most part, you don't have to worry about changing any information in the event system. It's just something that has to be there for buttons to work. The image itself that I just created is this white square. So if I highlight the image, that's this. And I can move this around in my canvas. And it shows you some information about the image here, sort of the distance from, in this case, the center. So from the center lines here, it shows you where this image is. So I'm going to put the image here. Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. And I just want to run the game. So I want to show you that that image shows up. So wherever it is in my canvas, if I move it over here, this gets overlaid on my game screen. So that's the idea here with this canvas thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this image. And I'm going to mess around with things like the color. So the image here, we see a few things here if I highlight the image in the inspector, we see rect transform, canvas renderer, which we normally don't have to mess with, and the image itself. So I can pick different images I want to display. Right now, it's just sort of no image, which is just, in this case, a solid color square. So if I want to change the color, I can come in here and I can change the color to a red and maybe make it a little bit transparent. And if I do that and run, then I'll have this sort of red square in my image in the appropriate location, wherever it's located on my canvas. So I want this to cover the whole screen. This is going to be my sort of game over screen. I want it to sort of be like a slightly transparent red to cover the whole screen. So I could make this really big and do something like this. But that's not ideal. And it doesn't use the features that this canvas system gives us. So I'm going to bring this back down to be small. And I'm going to click right here in the rect transform component. There's this box that has like some lines, and this one here says center middle. This is related to this little thing in the middle, this sort of X-looking thing in the middle of my canvas. It's related to the pivot, to the size, and to the anchor of where this individual item is located. So if I click on that piece, it brings up this other window. These are the anchor presets. So I can actually move the anchor around by clicking in some of these areas. I can click here. Now my anchor is up at the top middle. Now anchor's over here. So I can move the anchor around to the different locations. This is important when you scale the UI. If I anchor something to the middle, to the center, it will always change its location relative to the center when I say change the size of my game window. So having the anchor in an appropriate location is important when you change things like the aspect ratio. It does take a little bit of practice to get a handle on exactly what these sort of anchor things do. There's some modifier keys here too. If you hold Shift, it also sets the pivot. This little circle right here. So that sets the pivot as well to the different locations in my actual image. So if something rotates, it'll rotate about the pivot. If I hold Alt, it deals with the position. So now I can move this square around by holding Alt. But the pivot stays in the center. That might be what you want. If I hold Alt and Shift, it changes the position of this object, and it also changes the pivot. This is something that you do have to play with. It's not something that I expect to be like super intuitive right away. Most of the time, when I'm dealing with some simple UI stuff, I deal with these anchor presets by holding Alt and Shift and clicking the closest location to where I want this item to be. So if I had text that I wanted to be up in the upper right corner or upper left corner like this, I hold Alt Shift, click in the one that's the upper left corner, the top left corner, and then I move it from there. Because I can still move this. It's just this pivot is in the corner and it's anchored to the top left. And so then I move it somewhere where I want it and do whatever I need to do with it. For this object though, we're going to use a totally different one. I'm going to use this stretch in both directions. So I'm holding Shift and Alt, and I'm going to click on the one down here in the corner. So now my image has been stretched in both dimensions. Its pivot has been set to the center, and now it expands to the canvas. So rather than just making my image super large, I have the canvas automatically stretch it. So if I change my canvas size, it's the image itself. If I change the canvas size, and that's something I would do, for example, you could, if I change the aspect ratio or something, it's always, that image is always going to fit exactly in my canvas. It takes a little bit of practice to get used to exactly how this works. So think about what you want in your canvas and then mess around with the anchor presets and sort of see what happens when you use Shift and Alt and you click on the individual little rectangles here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add, I'm actually going to we're going to rename this. So right now it's just called image. I'm going to rename this to death panel. So this is the panel that I want to show when you die. And I'm going to make a couple of images, actually one image and 2 buttons underneath this, so as children of this. So I'll make another image here. So I'm going to right click on my death panel. I'm going to say UI image. So I have a second image here that's a child of this death panel that contains that red image. And rather than just use a box, I'm going to go to the source image and I'm going to find, so I have a bunch of my sprites in here that should be included in as part of the project when you downloaded it. I'm going to find I think it was melted. So that's the little melted image here. Now it's still the size of this box, so I probably want to move it around, increase the size a little bit as I mess with it. And I probably want this in the center. So something like this, sort of center, maybe a little bit higher. And I'm going to keep the anchor in the middle. So this is anchored to the middle. If I go change, for example, my aspect ratio, so maybe I go to that iPhone aspect ratio, it basically stays in the same location. Like this. So the same distance from the center of my window. Notice it doesn't squish down. We'll take a look at that in here in just a second. Let's go back to 16 by 9. So that's my melted image. There's not much else I need to do with this one. Gabe, how did I change the canvas size? So in the game mode, so in the game tab here, there's the aspect ratio, and you can actually set stuff to different aspect ratios. You can add your own if you know you're working on a phone that is, whatever, some different aspect ratio than what's something that's listed here. You can always add phone in. So I have this iPhone one. I think I may have added that one myself. I'm not sure, but there's other aspect ratios like 2:3 and 4:3 and 5:4, and you can do free aspect too, where if you change the size of the game window, it will change the size of the scene itself. It'll shrink the size and stuff automatically. So there's ways to do that. Typically, we'll leave it at 16:9 for this game, but we can actually change it if we need to. Andy, did you automatically size the red image? Yeah. So the image that red image is set in the rect transform. When I hold Shift and Alt, it's stretched in this way. So it is that red image is automatically stretched to fill the exact size of the canvas. And that's because I changed my rect transform, my anchor preset, to be a stretch to the full size of the canvas. So that's a nice easy way, because you could make it the size you want, but then if you start changing the aspect ratio, it might affect the actual image that you have. So for the melted image, I'm not going to change anything else. I just needed to get that image in there. I'm also going to add under this death panel. So I'm going to right click on the death panel and say UI, and I'm going to add 2 buttons. So I want this button and I want a second button. And I'm going to rename them. So the first one I might say like restart. And the second one on this list, I'm going to add this as menu. So just give them a quick name so I know what they're going to do. And I can move them around. Their anchor is currently center. That's fine. because they're going to be close to the center. So I'm going to leave their anchor to be at the center. And then with the restart button selected, I'm going to move it over. And the menu button, I'll move that one over like this. So they're both going to sort of sit underneath this sort of melted sign. I might move them sort of down a little bit as well or something, but we're gonna add an image to it here in just a second. Under each one of these buttons, it automatically puts in text. So the button has text on it. So this little text here that actually says button, that is literally just a little text box. So the text here literally says button. And if I put something else in here, I can change what the text is. We're actually not going to need that because our buttons are going to be images. But if you wanted the button to have whatever text on it that you can just type in, then you can do that with the button component because it automatically adds that text in there for you. So I'm going to delete these two text regions because I don't need them because we're just going to have an image. And I'm left with these two blank buttons. For the restart button, it has an image and a button component. So the image is just like the image we just put in, the melted and that red square. So I can say source image. I want to use, this is the restart, so I'm going to click the restart one here, like this. So that puts my image in the button region. And for the menu, I'm going to click the little circle with the dot in it and find my menu. So it's just this one's menu. There's a couple other menu 2 and menu 4. We're not using those. It's just the menu sprite. And then I can resize these to sort of whatever I want. So I might make this a little bigger, move it to where I want. Same thing with the menu, make it a little bigger. I'm not too concerned about it at the moment, whether everything's all lined up and all that. Looks like it's not quite. So I can move them around and sort of do whatever I want to with it. These are going to be buttons. They don't do anything yet, but they are going to do things when we click on them. They might be a little bit small, but that's sort of preference type stuff. In the button component on each of these, there's a whole bunch of sort of color things here. So there's like normal color, which typically you'll keep as either white for like an image or whatever color you want the text to be if you use the text component. Then there's highlighted color, pressed color, selected color, all of that. So I'm going to look at the highlighted color, and I'm going to change that. I'm just going to click on the color, and I'm going to change that to something that's maybe a little bit darker because I want to show you what it does. So if I press play, the game will actually be playing in the background, but if I hover over restart, notice how it changes color. So that is something that that's what the highlight color does. If I change the pressed color to maybe a blue or something, a dark blue, if I click on it, then it does that dark blue. This one here, the color hadn't been changed much, so it's still a little bit darker. But that's what these colors do. So they can let you give the user feedback as to what's going on with their mouse, whether they're hovering over it or whatever. So you don't have to mess with those sort of specifically, but they are there for you to deal with. The buttons are actually almost ready to go, which is nice. We just need to deal with this on click. Right now it says list is empty. When we click the button, we want it to do something. That's what the on click is for. So we need to write a little bit of code and then basically add that code to this so that we know when we click the button on click, we run a particular, in this case, it'll be running a method. We click the button, it runs a method. That's how we set up the action for a button click. So I think in the slides, I got a few little pop-up stuff. So here's things like scene and the canvas. So a lot of this stuff is already, a lot of this stuff I put in the slides that you can mess around with. Here's our sort of melted restart and menu that we made. So you have something that looks like this is fine. The death panel itself, so the parent to the buttons, so this death panel here underneath the canvas, this is something that we're going to turn off and on depending on what happens. So it'll be off when we start the game, and it'll be on as soon as we die. Now, we could write a little bit of code to have it fade in and fade out and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to worry about that for this game. We're just going to turn it on and off. But as soon as you know that, oh yeah, we can take this death panel and we can like do stuff with it, then we can start playing around with other effects and things like that once it's actually working. If you want to mess around with sort of effects when you die and stuff. So we will turn that on and off through code. I guess I have the health UI first. We're not going to worry about that just yet. I guess we'll do it slightly different order. So in our game manager, we're going to go to the game manager right now, and we're going to hook up this essentially this sort of death panel stuff. So I'm going to create in a game manager. I'm going to create a method called onRestartClick. So this is a method I'm creating. This isn't some built-in method or anything. And we're going to check some information here. We're going to check, is the death panel active? So by active, this is inactive, is it active like this? Is it being shown? So in the game manager, in the game manager, I'm going to write that little method. So I'm going to say public void on restart clicked. Or click, something like this. Now I'm going to check if my death panel, and I don't have any sort of pieces for this. I don't have a reference to the death panel. We're going to create that here in just a second. So I'm just going to say if death panel, I'll create the reference here in a sec, but if the death panel, it'll be active self. This is not a method. Let's create their reference so we get the autocomplete stuff in here. So in my game manager, right here, we have this player and the spawner. I'm going to create a public game object death panel. So we can drag our death panel object into the inspector to fill this in. So now I have my active self here. So if I do the death panel dot active self, if it's currently on, when we click restart, what's going to happen? Well, we want to turn it off. We also want to reset the player and the spawner. Well, we already have some reset code, so I'm going to copy that in here. So we'll reset the player and we'll reset the spawner. That sets him to a different position, basically. That wherever the player was, he'll be reset to wherever we determine, so the center or something. And the spawner resets as well because it does some stuff where it speeds up the spawning over time and things like that. So we want to reset back to its original state. There's also a method that I need to write that I want to write for this called I think it was public void. I'm going to call it the death panel switch, and it's going to take a Boolean. And this will be like state or something. So my death panel dot, and we're going to use set active state. So if I send a false into here, it's going to turn off the death panel. If I send a true into here, it's going to turn it on. So that's all I need to do for set active. The set active, we use this for the player as well. We say set active false when the player dies, so that it disappears. We'll do the same thing with this sort of game over screen, this sort of death panel screen. So in my if statement on restart click, I can say, actually we'll do death panel, death panel switch false. So when I click that restart button, I'm going to, if the death panel is active, so if we have died, so that panel is on, then I'm going to turn the panel off, reset the player, reset the spawner, and I should be good to go again. Should be good to go to play again. So this is what we want to happen when we click restart. Back in Unity, let it compile. When I am selected on the restart button, for the on click, so the thing that the list is empty, I'm going to press a plus sign, and I get a few options here. Wherever the function is located, in this case it's in Game Manager, wherever the function is located, I need to grab the object where that function is. So I need to grab the object. So in this case, it's my game manager object, and I need to drag it into the region here for onClicked, into the object region. Then it gives me an option for the functions. So my game manager script has a function called onRestartClick. So when I click that button, it will run from the game manager object, it will run onRestartClick. So if I delete this, I'll show you again. So I have list is empty when I've selected the restart button. I press plus. Wherever the function is located, it has to be in an object. It has to be in an object that currently exists. So the game manager object contains my game manager script, which is where my function is located that I want to run when I click the button. So I take my game manager object, drag it into the object location for the onClick, and then I go down. It's a game object. I could run a function from the game object, but I don't want to do that. There's transform, which you could run something from that if you want to, but the component I want to deal with is game manager because it has my function onRestartClick. And you can add more than one. You can have a button fire multiple things from multiple different objects if you want to. So it's not just a single thing. I could add more functions here that actually get called. But for this one, all I need is the onRestartClick. Another thing that I have to do on my game manager object, I need to fill the death panel here. So I'm going to take my death panel in my canvas and I'm going to move that into here. So the game manager knows the death panel and it knows what to do when I click restart because it calls that function. So if I do this, if I click restart, the panel goes away and everything gets sort of shifted around. The panel here is showing in mine because I have gizmos turned on. So in a regular sort of game setting, you're not going to have gizmos on. That shows you like the handlebars and other things like that. So the reason it was showing here is because I had gizmos turned on. So then we get to our regular game. Right now, nothing happens when I die, but I want to make it so it shows that panel now when I die as well. So let's do that. And again, I think I had these in a slightly different order for this. So let me go back to the code. And I'm going to go back to the player. We have take damage. Right now, when the player loses all their health, all we do is we set this game object, so the snowman object, the player object, to false. So that's why it disappears. But we need to turn that death panel on. So I'm gonna do that here. Game manager, remember, is a singleton. So I can say game manager.instance, and I immediately have an instance of my game manager. And then I can use that death panel switch, that function I just created, and say true. Okay, seems easy enough. When I die, turn off the player, turn on the death panel. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to run the game. I still have this menu up to start with, so I'm going to click restart. Notice that none of the fireballs like reset or anything like that, but I'm going to get hit 3 times, and I get the menu, and I can click restart. So we're going to click restart, and there's my character again. The reason why those fireballs didn't interact with him was because they were already inside of him, so there wasn't an enter. So there's some stuff that we might have to mess with. Before I restart, do it again. We're back again. So by just doing a few things with the UI, setting up a function that we call when we press the button, having this UI turn off or on depending on the situation, that gives us a way to reset the game. Most likely, we don't want to continue spawning after the player dies. I shouldn't keep spawning these fireballs at the moment. I should just let them go, basically turn off the spawning. That'll actually fix our error that we're getting here. In the console, I can actually double click on the error, and it shows me that right here, I get an error. This is in the enemy script. when the player's deactivated because they've died, it can't find this game object anymore. It doesn't exist, which means if I get an object that doesn't exist, null, I can't call get component player on null. So I get that error. That happens during the spawn. So this happens as soon as the enemy gets created, it looks for the player. There's a couple ways to fix this. I want to go to the spawner because I want to stop spawning. So in update, there's a few ways to deal with this, but I just don't want to run this code if the player's dead. I'm going to show you a long way to write this. So I'm going to say if. I'm just going to put a guard statement. So a guard statement is just checking if something is true or false, and then either running a certain code that does things or not running it. So it's your regular if, but it's sort of guarding so that I don't get an error because of some certain thing will go wrong if I run this code in a certain situation. This is not necessarily the best way to do it. The spawner doesn't know anything about the player. So the spawner can't directly check, is the player active? Is the player alive or dead? So I'm going to do something like this. Game manager.instance. Now I have access to the player. But the player is just a script. I need access to the player's game object. And then I need to check active self. So that might look kind of weird. Okay. Game manager.instance.player.gameObject.instance self or active self. Then I'll put my brackets all the way around this. All this is going to do is look, is the player active? Is the player game object active? If it is active, so in other words, if this is true, then we're going to be spawning fireballs. If it's false, then we're not going to spawn fireballs. We're going to skip that piece of the code. So that's what I sort of mean by a guard statement. If you don't want to have the indentation like this, you can always do this as well. So I can say if not this. So I'm going to do sort of the opposite direction here. And I'm going to say return that. Yeah, so Nick, player is not private. So that is one of the things that we did here because this is access from the inspector. You are right to ask that question, 100%. This, you probably want to be sort of private in some way, or at least not directly access it. So writing something like a getter, for instance, down here, or using one of the properties that C# allows, using a sort of property structure, is probably the better way to do this. So I would have something where I wouldn't directly use player. I would write a separate function, public void or public player get player. I would do something. It would probably be best to do something like this, so that you're not directly accessing it, and so that you can't change it in some other script sort of by accident or intentionally and then break stuff. So yes, your question there is 100% valid. The reason why it's public is because we want to access it in the inspector. So in the game manager here, I have I can drag the player into this spot. This wasn't something I was sort of I was intending to talk about, but you can have private things show up in the inspector. So I can make this private. But what I have to do is I have to put a tag above this. I have to say serialize field. So this private field now shows up in the inspector. So if I go back to code here and make sure, so it still shows up in the inspector, even though it's now private because of this serialized field tag. And usually I'll put it above the reference, but you can actually put it like this as well. So you can say serialized field, it's private, but it's serialized, which is the Unity term for shows up in the inspector. So I'm going to leave it as public, sort of leave it the way that we have it, but there are ways to sort of continue doing the sort of encapsulation OOP stuff where you are keeping your variables private, but still able to use the inspector the way that sort of Unity wants you to do it. So I'm going to keep it public for now. It'll sort of make things a little bit easier for us. But certainly for larger games and to hopefully not have your tearing your hair out because you're directly accessing the stuff all over the place, it is a good idea to use sort of getter or property type things. So yeah, so back in the spawner, if we flip this around and we do sort of the not version, so if the player game object is not active, we can just return. That's another example of your guard statement there. So we never actually do this piece. This is probably the better way to write it, just so you don't have tons of sort of indentation levels for tons of ifs. If you have a bunch of guard statements that need to happen, you can just put a guard statement in, and if you have another one, you can put another one in, and so on. So if I run this now, the player's active to begin with, so I'm just going to do restart here, and then I'm going to die, and what we should see is that no more fireballs spawn. If a fireball has already spawned, then it's going to continue moving, but we shouldn't see any more spawn at all, because we're just checking, is the player active? No, the player is not active. Don't spawn anymore. As soon as we restart, we should get some more fireballs spawning. So that's the idea with our sort of restart stuff. When it comes to the menu, we need to make a menu first before we can start hooking up the button to click on it. So our slides, we will add a little health UI, but I do want to get the I do want to get the menu in there first, and then we'll talk about some of the other previous slides. So we're going to create a brand new scene. This is we've been messing around in one scene, our sort of main game scene, the entire time. So we're going to create a brand new scene. I'm going to call this scene main menu. So in Unity, in my assets folder, I have a scenes folder, and that has the main game scene, the one we've been using. So in this folder, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say create scene, about a quarter of the way down. So I'm going to say create scene, and I'm going to call this one main menu. You should save whatever current scene you're working in. So we're in the main game scene right now. I'm going to save that. And I'm going to open up the main menu scene by double clicking. So I'm going to double click, and now I'm in the main menu, the main menu scene. So everything's gone. All I have here is a camera. All I want this to be, though, is a UI to let me click the button called play. That's really all I'm going to put in here, and that's basically what's on the slide here. Volcano Island, there's sort of an image that goes with this, and then there is a play. So I do have that image. You should already have the image, and you should have the play image as well. So we're going to add a canvas, and I'm going to add an image and a button. So I'm going to click in the hierarchy, and I'm going to say UI, image. So again, we get this big old canvas here. I'm going to change the image to be the title. There we go. So I'll change the image to be title. And it's a little bit small compared to my canvas. So I'm just going to sort of drag it over here and make it bigger. Stuff looks a little stretched out, so we'll mess around with it and something like this. Maybe so we got a little snowman here. Maybe I'll put this off a little bit to the side, something like that. So I just arrange my image wherever I want it. This should be fine. If we want to, we can change the transform, the anchor presets and stuff. I don't want to stretch it out. So if I click the stretch one, that's not going to be at all what I want. So I think I'll just keep it basically in the center. Because I stretched it, though, I need to stretch it back here to where I had it. So I'll just keep the anchor preset here in the center. And then I'm going to add to this canvas, I'm also going to add UI button as well. And I'll move the button over here. Maybe I'll have the preset here, or the anchor point be right center, like this. And then I'll move it a little bit away from that right center. So I'll put it like right here. So it's anchored to the right-hand side of my canvas. This one is similar to the other buttons where it's just an image. So I don't need that text component. So I can delete the text component off of here. And I can change the graphic to, not that one, I want to change the image. So the source image, I can change that to play. And then I'll make that some somewhat large size. Maybe change the highlight color to a darker thing and the pressed color to a, I don't know, the sort of dark bluish, sort of whatever I want for this. So if I press play in the main menu scene, this is what I get. So I hover over play, I can click play. Doesn't really do a whole lot. Notice how the hover's not working. Technically, the button is selected right now because I'd already clicked on it. So I have to click off of the button in order for the hover stuff to actually play again, to actually work correctly. So that's what my main menu scene looks like at the moment. If I want, let's say I want this to be black in the background instead of this blue color, that is the main camera doing that. So here I have background is that blue color. Maybe I want it to be black. I could change the background to black in the camera and then play again, and now I have a black background. So that doesn't make the hat look too great. So you probably want to change it to be whatever. It's not really a big deal. Well, we need to get the button working properly. We need to have some way to change from this scene, the main menu scene, to a different scene, the main game scene. So what we're going to do, and let me move this out of the way. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another script. This is going to be a menu script, and it's not going to actually do much. So I'm going to create a new game object, and I'm just going to call it, I'll call like menu manager or something. I'm going to add a new script to this game object. So in my scripts folder here, I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this menu manager. This isn't going to do much. Let's open it. There we go. In fact, it's not going to do anything on start, and it's not even going to have an update. And it's just going to have one function, public void on play click. So this is going to be the function that I play when we click the button. And yes, Nick, all I did was create an empty. Yep. This is going to load the main game scene. There's two things we have to do to get this to work. There's a class called the scene manager. This is why I didn't call this script scene manager, because there is a class called scene manager, and it has a bunch of functions to it. But notice how it's not doing anything here. It shows as an error. It's not doing anything when I press a dot, so it doesn't give me any autocomplete. That's because I need an extra using. I need using Unity Engine dot scene management. Now scene manager gives me all the info. So I don't need this for any of my other scripts except for ones that are going to change the scene or be in some way responsible for changing the scene. So now I have scene manager because I'm now using the scene management aspect of Unity. And I can do scene manager dot load scene, and it's literally just a string. Main game. Whatever you named your scene, that's what goes right there. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to Unity. Wait for it to do a compile. I'm going to take my menu manager script and drag it onto the menu manager game object. So now that script is attached. And then for the button, I'm going to create an on-click event and drag my menu manager, so button, drag my menu manager into the object location on the on-clicked on button, and then select that function that I just created, on play click, or on play click. So it's that entire process we did for creating a button in the previous scene. I just did that real fast here. So I had an empty that I called menu manager. I dragged my menu script onto it, went to my button, took the menu manager, dragged it down into the on-click location here. After I created one, I did the plus here, and then dragged it in and selected the menu manager on play click. So when I save this and run, if I click this button, we're now into our main game scene. Now I still have this window open, this panel open, so we're going to have to deal with that. But we were able to switch scenes very easily. And when I stop playing, it sends me back to this main menu scene. We're going to use this main menu scene to play our original sound as well, our music, but essentially this is hooked up appropriately for us. So make sure that's saved, and we can go back to our other scene, our main game scene. Yeah. Now for our menu, we should be able to click that to go back to our main menu scene. So in the game manager script, I'm going to say using Unity Engine .scene management. I'm going to write another function down here, public void on menu click. And this one is going to scene manager, load scene, menu, or main menu. So make sure that's saved. Go back to Unity. In my canvas, on that menu button, under the death panel, on that menu button, I'm going to create an on-click event, drag my game manager into the object location, and find my on menu click. So I'll save that. So now when I run it this time, I click on menu, it brings me back here. I click on play, it brings me here. So that's the way to switch scenes. It's a very easy way to do it. So oftentimes people will use separate scenes for all sort of the little pieces where you go stuff. Like an options menu, you might switch scenes. A main menu, a save menu, whatever. You might switch scenes to something different. The scenes can load very quickly if you don't have a lot in them. The scenes will be very slow to load if you do have a lot in them. So whenever you see a loading screen, especially in like a Unity game, it's basically just loading the scene. So you had a scene transition take place. It now needs to load all the stuff that's going to be in that scene. For a simple game like this, it's basically just instant. I'm going to do my restart. Do that. So we want to make sure that this screen does not come up when we actually start playing our game. When I click play, I don't want the melted screen to already be there. So we're gonna fix that really quick. In the game manager, when the game manager starts, I want to also make sure, so we do the player reset, spawner reset, I'm going to make sure that the death panel switch, I'm going to make sure that's set to false. So whenever the game manager starts up, we turn off the death panel and reset everyone. So I'm going to save that. And when we run here, we should see that it's off. It'll come on when we die. We say restart, it goes away, and we can flip to the menu and back. This menu, back, it's off, we're ready to go. I know that was maybe a lot of stuff, a lot of sort of messing around with some of these panel canvas things, and then messing around with attaching game objects to make buttons work. But it gets to be a pretty smooth process when it gets to be a pretty smooth process once you get used to sort of adding buttons. Nick, where in the game manager did you want to take a look? Here's the start, restart, and the main menu one here. So I just added the death panel switch to false for start, so that when it starts up, we have the death panel disappear, and then the other ones are for our clicking on the different menu buttons. The different buttons are. There's one more UI thing I want to add, and that was in part of the slides here. And we'll add the music stuff. So that was right here. So I want to have a health UI as well. So we're going to add a little health UI to the canvas. It's going to be part of the same canvas that the death panel is part of. It's just we have the death panel off when we're playing. Death panel turns on after we die. So under the canvas, I'm just going to select, I'm going to create another image and a little bit of text. And I'm going to make sure that their anchor presets are all in the top left. So it's going to be the top left up here is going to be sort of where everything's anchored to. So if I change the aspect ratio or something, this little heart, this little sort of stylized heart and some text will be right next to it, right next to that corner. So let me, in here in our main game view, I'm actually going to turn off the death panel. So I'm just going to click the little check mark up there next to the name. And I'm going to add under the canvas, not under the death panel. Death panel is all set. We don't need to make any changes to that. I'm going to add another UI image. So I get my image here. The anchor presets, I'm going to set to, I'm going to hold Shift and Alt, and I'm going to set it up here. So to the upper left. And for the image itself, for the source image, I'm going to pick I think it's called heart. So I want to pick the heart. And then I can move it around a little bit. Right now it's like really snug against the corner. I might want it a little bit further away. And for the size, it looks okay. Maybe I want to make it a little bit smaller, but I think that should be fine. So now whenever I play the game, I have a little heart there at the top. But I also want a little bit of text as well. So I'm going to add a UI text. And I'm going to put this one in the same anchor preset. So I'm going to hold Shift and Alt and click here in the upper left. And then I'm going to move this sort of next to the heart. If I zoom in real close, you can see it says new text. So that's right here. So if I type whatever, it fills in there. I definitely want to make the text bigger, but I'm just going to put an X and a 3. So it'll show you like how many hearts you have, how many lives you have, or how many hits you can take. You can change stuff with the font. You can add new fonts. Arial is the only one that's sort of default in there. So if you need to add new fonts, you can do that. You can change things, the bold, italic, all that stuff. What I'm going to do is change the font size. So I want the font size. It tries to fit it within this box. So similar to a text box in sort of most other sort of text applications. So I'm going to increase the size, maybe here or something. And color-wise, it should already be sort of mostly black. There we go. Change it to a little bit more black. I could have it be a little bit transparent to, whatever. At that point, it's sort of preference. But I put this as times 3, sort of x3. So if I play now, we see that, oh, okay, it looks like I've got 3 hearts. Right? But when I get hit, nothing changes. And when I die, of course, it's there, and then of course it still shows the hearts and stuff there. So I want this to actually react to what my character's health actually is. So we're going to make another quick change to the game manager. In our references sort of area where we have the player, the spawner, and the death panel game object, I'm going to add another one. I'm going to add, we're going to do this. We're going to say public text. This is part of the UI system. Now, it doesn't look like there's a text here. So I need an additional using Unity engine.ui. It's not obvious that you need these usings to do particular things, so it's just something you have to get used to. If you want to do scene stuff, you got to include the scene management. If you want to do UI stuff in a script, you got to include Unity engine.ui. So similar to, I mean, it shouldn't be too sort of dissimilar from Java. If you want to use JavaFX, you got to include all the JavaFX stuff. If you want to use your scanner, you got to include scanner, all that. So I can make a public text, and I'm just going to call this health text. So this now becomes available in my inspector. So back to Unity. In the game manager, actually, did I save that? Probably So I'll save it. Unity should recompile the code. And in my game manager, I should now see the health text in my inspector. So I can grab that text I created, the one that includes the X3, and I can throw that into the health text region. So now I have access to that, and I can change what it displays. So back to code. I'm going to write a function. And I just keep sort of putting these at the end. Obviously, you'd probably want to organize this a little bit better code-wise so that all the menu stuff is maybe in the same area or something. This function I'm going to call public void, maybe like update health text. And maybe put in a health value here as a parameter. So I can take my health text object and I can say dot little t text. That's going to equal a string. So I'm going to put in an x plus health. Health. So whatever value I send in here, I'm going to get an x and then that value in that text that shows up on my UI. So where should I run this? Probably from the player. So when the player takes damage, I'm always going to, I'm always going to run the update. Actually, I need the game manager instance update health text, and I'll send in health, which is the current value that I have for the player. That should be L there. So when the player gets hit, it informs the game manager, hey, we need to update the health text. And the game manager will then directly update the text in my health text object. So I'm sort of going through the game manager to update the UI. And it should just be UI. Yep, just be the Unity Engine.ui. So if I let this compile, here, as soon as I get hit, the value changes to 2, 1, and then it should change to 0 when it does this. I can restart. And when I restart, notice it stays 0. So that's something that we need to change. That would be just a normal sort of bug that we need to mess with, that we need to fix. So yes, Nathan, here's your update health text. This basically means we need to call this function whenever we reset the game. So on restart click, we call player.reset. So back in player, on reset, we set the health back to 3. We need to make sure to tell the game manager that we need to update the health. This is not the only way to do this. This is not the only way to have this sort of communication. I could have the game manager constantly, every frame, checking the health of the player, so the player never has to do any communication. Is that worth doing? Probably wouldn't make any difference in our game. But performance-wise, maybe if you had a more complicated game, maybe you wouldn't want to do that. Especially maybe if you were also checking the health of enemies every frame or something. If you had lots of enemies, that could start to bog things down. So part of it is thinking about performance as well. We're not going to do any performance sort of checking and stuff. There's not really a whole lot we're doing sort of game-wise that we're going to need that sort of stuff. But this is one way to deal with some of that communication, and it's facilitated by using a singleton. Is that a good thing or not? A singleton? Stay tuned for next week for that. So this was a lot of hooking stuff up. This was a lot of let's make a button, let's write a function for the button, and then hook the object that has the function into the button so we can actually call it. So it was a lot of that sort of hooking up, which does happen a lot in Unity. It is a common thing to sort of write a little bit of code and then hook it up in the inspector, and then write some more code and try to hook something up in the inspector, and then write some code, realize you broke things, and then have to go back to it. So I think that fixes most of our little bugs here. If I do restart, my health goes back to 3. If you want to add in some background stuff, because as I said, we're basically finishing the game today. If you want to add in some background stuff, we can go all the way back here into the scene itself, so where we actually see our snowman. There are plenty of sprites. I don't think you guys have this one in here, but I did create this one a little bit later on, so I got sort of an extra background sprite. But there's a bunch of single sprites here for things like throwing in some mountains or something here in the background. I got some darker ones too that you can sort of throw back behind. Let me move a little bit further back. Things like that. So you can certainly take some of the sprites. There's some clouds and stuff here as well. So I got like 5 different versions of some clouds. You can always make them larger and stuff too. And sort of build up your background. Or if you want that. Or if you want to, you can I can post this other background up here as well. If we want to match up my body go right there. For my background, I'm just going to move this back a bit. So if we look in the 3D view, the background I just moved like way further back, so it'll sort of always be in the background. So if that's something that you want to mess with, you certainly can. The ground, back to the 2D view. The ground, then you can always shift around as well. So I can move this ground, say, down a little bit here or something, and then I can move the snowman around as well, have it always spawn. Instead of spawning at 0, 0, 0, have it spawn sort of further down whenever I do a reset. So there's lots of stuff we can do to mess around with that. For example, if I go to the player, right now I have a vector 2 position, X and Y, that it gets set to when it gets reset. So I could take my player and move him down like this, and see that's at about -4 in the Y. So I could put him at -4 there. And in my code, I could just make sure that this was -4, for instance. So there's a lot of little sort of setting stuff that we can mess with to get our background looking decent and where the fireballs land and stuff like that. So they should explode sort of somewhere close to the ground here in this image. So that's a couple of those sort of little pieces. The last little piece I want to do in the last few minutes that we have is the sound. So I'm going to save my main game scene, and I'm going to go back to the main menu. And I'm going to make a new empty game object, and I'm going to call that background music, or maybe I'll just call it music. And there's a couple of things that I need with this music object here. I need to add a component called an audio source. Add an audio source. This is what you do for any sound you want to create. So if I want my fireballs to make a sound, I add an audio source to the fireballs. And then I put the audio clip into that region there. So I do have a sound. This is a sort of a little sort of background tune made in Boscasile. So in my music object, I can drag this into the audio clip part. So this will now play this audio clip, play on awake, and I want to loop it as well. And I'm going to turn down the volume, like way down, so that I don't blow your ears out once this game starts. Play on awake just means as soon as this object is there, it will play the song, and the loop will obviously give me a loop. So we should hear it play when we run right now. So I can just barely hear it here in the background. Yeah. I don't know. I don't remember if you guys can hear it from this or not. So I can just barely hear it, and obviously you can mess with the volume as well. But as soon as I switch scenes, it's gone. So no more music here. So what I'm going to do is create a script. And I'm just going to call this script my music manager. And we're going to make this script, open it up. I'm going to make this script a singleton. So I'm actually going to take the game manager singleton piece and I'm just going to copy and paste it in since we don't have a lot of time. Delete everything else in here and paste this in. And this will be music manager. So I have this music manager singleton. And in my start function, I'm going to grab my audio source. And this should need, this is going to be get component. I have lost my autocomplete here. I'm going to say get component audio source. I'm going to grab the audio source so that I can grab my clip. So I'm going to say this will be audio clip. This is my clip, and this is going to be source. Clip. Don't need the function there. So we're going to grab the clip that's part of the audio source. So that is, go back to the music manager here, or there's just the music, the music option. That is the audio clip that I have. So I'm going to grab that clip, and if it's not currently playing, so if not source dot is playing, then I'm going to source dot play. And actually, I didn't need that clip at all. I didn't actually need to reference the clip. I could just play the source. So this will play automatically now on start. If it's not already playing, it will play. So we already had the play on awake, but this guarantees that it will be playing just in case something goes wrong. And the last thing that I need is this. Inside of awake, I'm going to say don't destroy on load this dot game object. This is what keeps it around. So let me show you. So I have this music game object. As soon as I start up the scene here, it does start to play. When I click play, it should have stayed around. Let's make sure that I actually saved it then. Should stick around. We might have to mess with this next time. I know we've only got like a minute left. It should stick around because of this. I'll have to check why. Because this line should cause it to stick around even when you change transitions. So I'll have to see why that actually did not do it there. Yeah. So just because we're just about out of time, I do want to mention just a couple of last things. The sound effect stuff is exactly the same way, and I can potentially talk about it a little bit next week as well. Sound wise, Bose Casillo is a very easy one to use, and I mentioned it before. And then LMMS is a DAW. The music that I made for the Let 'Em Dare, I actually used a DAW called Cakewalk, which is also free. For sound effects for the Let 'Em Dare, if you want to look at that one, I use BFXR for the sound effects, or you can use Audacity and your voice. So so that's a little bit of sound stuff, and there's a few extra pieces here. The don't destroy on load should work, so I'll check and see why that if I missed something there. So the Volcano Island assignment is available. I'm going to go to that PDF here for just for a minute, and then we will start on some design patterns next time, and hopefully fix this little thing. I do have another resource here for you if you want to take a look at Unity Sound. If you want to take a look at some Unity sound stuff, this is a pretty good introduction to some of the sound effect stuff and some different things you can do with sound, just because we didn't have a ton of time to do that today. So on Blackboard, for you guys, the assignment itself, this PA1, it's essentially adding a few things in. So I do want a little short document that sort of outlines the changes and additions, basically how you did this stuff. So a dash mechanic, some extra health instead of just fireballs, have some extra health maybe fall from the sky. Some stuff with graphical effects. Obviously, we didn't add that many particle effects, so that's something that you can add in. I want you to at least mess around with some graphics a little bit. So you don't have to change the entire graphics of the entire game, but maybe create a different looking fireball, maybe a different snowman if you want to. And then this idea of smart fireballs. So I want you to create a fireball that doesn't chase the enemy, but that picks a location near where the player currently is located when the fireball spawns, and then moves to that location instead of just straight down. So I'll give you some hints about these over the course of sort of the next week-ish, so that it should hopefully help you guys work on it. But with teams of around sort of 4, this should be definitely easily doable in about 2 weeks. Your code B for Volcano Island will be available on GitHub. I can put up, so I do sort of have like a finished version, or at least a version that is sort of close to what we did during class. My intention was to put that one up. So I can definitely do that. So if you want to either just take a look at it or download it and see the sort of individual pieces that I had for that version of it, then I can definitely put that one up. But make sure when you do your sort of final submission that you are pushing to the GitHub Classroom version that you initially started with, because that's where I will be grading from. So sorry I took a couple of minutes extra, but there's definitely a lot to talk about. So I'll see about that don't destroy on load thing for next time, and yeah, otherwise have a good weekend. What time office hours tomorrow? So yeah, so there is an office hours Zoom link, so that's the one you'll want to use, and I will be in the office hours from 1 to 2 tomorrow for sure. So yeah, so that's it. So have a good weekend, folks, and I will see you on Tuesday for some design patterns.
Thanks, Professor. Have a good one.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Professor.
I had a quick question, and I was wondering if you wanted me to wait